What I've found in my own life is that this practice of really releasing all of the doing energy, dropping into the state of effortless presence, which is kind of an art and a skill to learn how to do that because we're all so busy and so used to doing all the time. But getting familiar with that has been probably the most healing thing that I have in my life, and also the greatest source of creativity. So it's become like this incredibly, it's just like tapping into this superpower almost to kind of rejuvenate, to re-energize myself, to get insights and creativity when things feel stuck. So I thought we could just kind of talk about that from a more exploratory point of view. Hey, Richie. So welcome back from India for starters. How was your trip?
Thank you, Cort. It's great to be back. The trip was really a great trip, and it was especially meaningful to see His Holiness the Dalai Lama again. And while he is less inclined to engage in extended conversation, his compassion and his presence are undiminished.
Yeah, I saw that video of you online on YouTube with you two greeting each other, which was really sweet. Amazing that you have that close relationship that you do. So today, shifting gears a little bit, I thought we could talk about the neuroscience of being, which is probably the most exploratory topic that we've covered here. There's as we both know, there's not a lot of specific research exactly on this topic, and yet it's something that we talk about all the time. Hopefully, it's something that we will or others will start to do research on. And I was just reflecting on the retreat that I did a few months ago. As you know, I did a 2-month solitary retreat outside Oaxaca, Mexico, just me alone in a cabin. And a lot of the practice I was doing was really just sitting doing nothing, which for people who have never meditated or even done this kind of effortless awareness practice that you and I have done a lot, it might seem strange or incomprehensible why you would even do that. What I've found in my own life is that this practice of really releasing all of the doing energy, dropping into the state of effortless presence, which is kind of an art and a skill to learn how to do that because we're all so busy and so used to doing all the time. But getting familiar with that has been probably the most healing thing that I have in my life, and also the greatest source of creativity. So it's become like this incredibly, it's just like tapping into this superpower almost to kind of rejuvenate, to re-energize myself, to get insights and creativity when things feel stuck. So I thought we could just kind of talk about that from a more exploratory point of view. I'd love to hear from you. I've always actually wanted to ask you this. I never have. What what do we even think might be going on in our biology and specifically in our brain? What would our hypotheses be if we were to study this? So maybe we can just open this up and talk about it. I can share a little bit later some of the meditative point of view, especially the how of this, which there's very, very specific instructions. But why don't I just kick it over to you as just some opening thoughts, and then we can just see where the conversation goes. So what does this first just spark for you in your mind when
Yeah.
you think about this?
Well, I think it's helpful to begin this conversation really at a phenomenological level by sort of fleshing out what we really mean when we use this word. And I think the way you teed it up, Court, is helpful because you contrasted this mode of being with the mode of doing.
Yeah.
And I think that is helpful for viewers in reflecting on this. And it may be, and it's likely, and I don't know what you think of this. And obviously, this is one we particularly have not rehearsed. That it's probably on some kind of continuum.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, definitely.
uh, and so it's not that you're either in a mode of being or in a mode of doing, but there's probably some gradation. And for those viewers that are meditators, many people I think have gotten a glimpse um, of what less doing and more being might be if you sort of increase the ratio, if you will, of being to doing in your practice. How does that feel?
Hmm.
Um, and there's another thing that, or a couple of things that you said that are also illuminating that I think are helpful in thinking about what the brain mechanisms might be. You talked about, I think you talked about creativity. At least you
Yeah.
did earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, kind of as a
Um,
source of creativity, tapping into that inner space.
yeah, a source of creativity, and so that implies that there's a kind of freedom, if you will. A One of the things that we might say is a relaxing of the constraints,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and that I think gives us some insight into what may be going on in the brain.
Yeah.
Um, and so. Uh, uh, so those are, some of the phenomenological characteristics, and I would certainly agree from my own practice. I mean, you've had a lot more practice than I've had, but in my own practice, I certainly have that kind of experience um, of really having a less constrained mind, if you will.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, it just is experienced as more flexible. It can go wherever it needs to go, rather than it being either pulled by something from the external world or directed from something in the internal world.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so. The way I think it primarily shows up in the brain
Actually,
is
before we get there,
yeah,
maybe if you don't mind my jumping in,
yeah,
because
please, yeah,
I think there's something. I think you're onto something. I'm glad we're doing this in a very spontaneous, organic way. And for everybody watching, this is utterly unrehearsed. We literally have like zero thoughts or show notes about what we're going to talk about here. But you talked about the phenomenology, and it's true that I think we can say that, from doing, contrasting doing and being, and we talk about this as though it's just sort of obvious what we're talking about. But it occurred to me, even just listening to you now, that being from a meditative point of view means something very, very specific, and probably something that is not at all clear if you're not a meditator, or even if you're a meditator and are just not trained in very specific meditative traditions that are focused on this quality of effortless presence. So, a couple points to make from that meditative point of view that might hopefully clarify and illuminate what we're talking about here. One is to distinguish physical being, meaning not doing, like dropping physical activity. For example, sitting on a couch, right? From that point of view, you could say at a physical level, you are not doing anything. Maybe you're being. But I think we all know that you can sit on a couch and your mind can be super active, right? You could either be intentionally mentally active, like you're thinking about something or ruminating about something or whatever, or more often, you're actually unintentionally, your mind is filled with activity. So physically, it might look like you're in some state of being, but actually, you're not going to feel like that because your mind is occupied. It might feel scattered or agitated or any number of things. In fact, we all have lots of experience where we're doom scrolling or doing things that physically might feel like we've let go of some activity, but it's not restful. It certainly isn't transformative in any meditative way. So that's maybe just one important point, that physical inactivity can help, but it's not necessarily the defining characteristic of it, which is to say it's something going on in the mind. So this is where I
yeah.
think the meditative can, yeah.
I think that that's crucial. What you just said, absolutely crucial, and I'm glad you said it. Sometimes we're so immersed in the meditative world, we can sort of take this for granted. Um, but, that clarification is really helpful. And, sadly, I think in our society today, there unless you sort of make space for it in an intentional way, there just are fewer opportunities for dropping into that kind of mode of being because of the exposure that we all have to this vast amount of information that's being thrown at us all the time, and
Yeah.
that often is hard to resist.
Yeah, in fact, I was this topic came to mind because I just was giving a talk last night at a local meditation center, and we were actually talking about this. And exactly what you just said was the first thought I had about it, which was the amount of information that we're consuming. And this analogy that you and I have talked about many times, where you could kind of think about information to the mind and the brain like food is to the body. And when you think about food, you think about two things. Your diet, it's the quantity of food you eat and the quality of food you eat. So if you think about information that same way, the first thing that's obvious is we are consuming an insane amount of information. If you go back 50 years, certainly 100 years, or just the entirety of human civilization up until now, and you just compare it to the kind of the amount of information, it's just astronomically larger, right? Like the moment we wake up, we grab our phones, we're listening to things, we're hearing things, and just this barrage of information all the time. So
Yeah.
the quantity, again, if you're thinking about food, like we're just stuffing our mouth with food 24 hours a day. And then there's the quality of that. And of course, we could say there too, compared to 100 years ago or 50 years ago, the information largely would have been through interactions that we're having with people we know well. That would have been like far and away the kind of information we consume. And then maybe we pick up a newspaper, maybe we pick up a book at the end of the day, but most of it's just we're talking to people or we're just on our own doing whatever we do. So the quality of the information is largely social. And now it's doom scrolling, podcasts, a million other things. So both the quantity and the quality of the information diet we have, you can see is just profoundly unhealthy from a certain point of view. And I think the point you're making, which links it back to being, is being and having space to just sort of turn off, to close the spigot of information, so to speak. Like being is that gives us that space to sort of digest and to kind of process what's happening. But we've erased all of that. We don't have that space. When we have times where we have physical inactivity, we have the faucet is still on. We still have the phone in our hands, or we're binge watching the show or something. We don't have any space where the physical inactivity is linked with like a mental openness, unless maybe you meditate where you have a little bit of that space. So it's kind of crazy actually that we somehow have created this situation where both the information diet and the space to process that are just way out of alignment. I don't know that.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true, and it's um, that's the predicament in which we're living. And as I've said on a previous Dharma Lab, we're all participants in a grand experiment for which none of us have provided our informed consent. And this is a big part of it. And, uh, we're witnessing some of the, and I think we're witnessing just the tip of the iceberg right now, but we're witnessing some of the really toxic consequences that come from this.
So I'm curious if we dig into the question of what are we even talking about? What actually is being? The Tibetan tradition, kind of the Buddhist psychology that underpins the Tibetan approach, where there's a lot of emphasis on effortless presence, on being, the practice of open awareness, which I know is which is one of your, and certainly is one of my core meditation practices. It really focuses on three things. These are kind of like the active ingredients of being. And there's something in the alchemy, like it's not any one of these on their own. In fact, just any one on their own doesn't really do the trick. It's somehow the alchemy between all three. And it's really, those three are effortlessness, presence, and naturalness. So you could say natural, effortless presence if you wanted to kind of give a slightly more wonky description of what do we mean by being, you'd say it's an effortless, natural presence. And each of those kind of means something quite specific in a minute. Like there's some precision to what that actually means. So the effortless part, and maybe we could take these one by one, and I'd be curious to hear what you think might be going on in the brain, maybe like what, if we were to study this, what would we hypothesize? But
Mhm.
the effortless piece has to do with a release of attentional control, and maybe more
Yeah.
broadly, any kind of cognitive control. So
Yes.
you're kind of dropping the rein. You're sort of, rather than like you're trying to do something with the mind, which even most forms of meditation you're trying to focus on your breath,
Exactly.
or you're trying
Uh,
to think about something, or you're focusing on a mantra. It could be anything, but you're trying to do something with your mind. Actually, in this stuff, it's a totally different paradigm. You're actually releasing the control. You're dropping the
yeah.
reins. You're kind of,
Yeah.
you're in the driver's seat, but you're taking your hands off the wheel kind of. So I'm curious,
Right.
yeah, what
Right.
would you,
So here, yeah, it's good to take these step one by one. Um, there's a lot of reason to believe that the effortlessness piece is going to be associated with the prefrontal cortex going offline.
mm.
Um, uh,
So like a
and the reason
deactivation of the prefrontal cortex.
deactivation, and the reason for that is that the prefrontal cortex is key for self-regulation, for voluntary control, for effortful thinking, planning.
So this
Uh,
is like
you know,
what people have heard us refer to some of the key hubs in the executive, what we've previously talked about as the executive network. So see, these are some of the key hubs in that executive network. Is that
right? Exactly.
so? The boss is kind of going out
Exactly.
to lunch.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and we actually have data on this,
Mm.
not a lot, but we have some data. So we published a paper a number of years ago in very long term meditation practitioners. And this was a paper that Julie Brzezinski was the
Is this the
first
U-shaped
author.
curve, the
Yeah.
intentional expertise paper?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yes. And so what Cort is referring to here is that um, in the among um, among experienced meditators who've had a moderate degree of meditative experience, when they are resting their awareness on some specific object, say on their breathing, using in the words of kind of Mingyur Rinpoche, the way he would phrase it is using breathing as a support for our awareness. Um, uh, in that kind of meditation, we are bringing awareness to the breath, and the typical instruction is that if we find that our mind has wandered, we can simply bring it back to the breathing. Uh, and so that um, strategy of directing your attention to a specific object and bringing it back when the attention lapses is something that requires the prefrontal cortex.
Mm.
Um, and in
And it's like,
the
in this case, you have a clear goal in mind, like you're supposed to be with the breath, and you're basically, the prefrontal cortex is the part that is redirecting. Like when it's off, you can redirect back to the goal you've chosen or back to the object you've chosen.
exactly, and so and the reason we talk about it as what we call an inverted U-shaped function in the sort of technical lingo is that the kind of meditator that I'm talking about is smack in the middle of this curve.
So they're not the
Um,
super experts, but they're
they're not the
experienced.
super
They're not
right.
novices, but they're not like the Olympians.
Right. And so they're using their prefrontal cortex to keep their awareness focused on their breathing. Among ranked beginners, say, who are just starting to meditate, their mind is, wandering, maybe quite chaotically, and they don't really have a well-developed prefrontal muscle.
So
Um,
their prefrontal cortex is not active, but it's because they're distracted. Not
exactly.
right. Whereas
They're
the
they're they're distracted and they don't have a well-developed facility for bringing their mind back from distraction.
Hmm.
Uh, and so their prefrontal cortex is not very activated, but it's not activated because they haven't developed it.
Hmm.
And then on the far side, on the opposite side,
The Olympians.
uh, the Olympians, those are folks who've really practiced a long time. And this is, I think, one of the skills that emerges only after really long-term practice.
And what would you say,
Um,
like, define really long term? I mean, we're talking 10 to 30, 30 to 50. We're talking tens of thousands of hours for sure.
yeah, in this study, I believe the cut point was around 25,000 hours.
So this is a
Um,
lot. This is
yeah.
a lot.
So, yeah, viewers can do the
This
arithmetic
is
at
like
home,
Mingyur
but
Rinpoche level meditator.
well, he's several um,
Yeah,
X beyond that. But yeah,
he's the Olympian of the Olympians.
yeah. Um, so, uh, just to say a little bit more about the advanced meditators who are on that opposite extreme, what we see in them is that if the invitation is to bring awareness to their breathing, there is a transient activation of the prefrontal cortex. So, say their awareness was on sound, and then you give them the invitation to bring their awareness to the breath. So, they have to move their awareness from sound to their breathing.
Hmm.
That um, voluntary shift of attention requires the prefrontal cortex, but it's really transient.
It's just like a
Wh-
spike of activity, and then it's
Just a
back to
spike,
baseline.
right? And then once the awareness rests on the breath, it's like, an elephant sitting on a rock. It just won't
So this is
move.
effortless attention.
Effortless. Yeah. And then um, because it's effortless, it doesn't require the resources of the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex can go offline, and the awareness is stable on the breathing.
That's so
And so
cool.
this is why this is this inverted U-shaped function.
So it's kind of like if you imagine, jogging or something like that. You could take somebody who really has not worked out and is just starting, and maybe they can run a little bit, but then they're just going to have to sit down because they just don't have the endurance, the cardiac capacity, whatever, like, but they just can't go very far. And so they're inactive, but just simply because they don't have the capacity. Then there's somebody who maybe has been jogging for a while and they can jog, they can keep jogging, but it's effort, like it's effortful. They're having to apply a lot of effort. And then you can imagine a genuine Olympian who's just like, they get up and it's just like nothing. They like have to get up and stand up and go, but then it's like they're not even breaking a sweat to just jog a few miles. It's like,
Right.
it's kind of like that at the brain level. Is that a
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
so the cool thing in this, and this goes back again to this aspect of being, is that this effortlessness is trainable. Like it's you can kind of cue into this as like an experiential element and then get familiar with that. You can sort of train to have that level of effortlessness. The interesting thing is that, again, going back to this formula of effortless natural presence, these other two things are key ingredients too, because I think for most people, if you've never meditated before, and say you did get, like, you can teach, and we could teach somebody to drop the mental effort, but if that's all you do, likely what's happening is they're just going to ruminate. I mean, basically it's default mode activity, and then it's utterly unpleasant, and it won't likely lead to anything other than more thoughts and rumination. And so what you need is this combination of the effortlessness. And then the trick is to do this in such a way that a kind of a spontaneous awareness arises within that. And it's almost a combination between the effortlessness and the orientation to awareness. And those kind of need to happen together. And it's a trick because usually the only way we know how to do that is in a kind of applying mental effort to focus on something. And this is I think the art of doing this. Um, but the second piece of that then is presence. In traditional
Yeah.
terms, they say non-meditation. That's actually the word they use for the effortless part. Like you're not effortfully meditating, but nor are you distracted, which sounds almost paradoxical, but you need both of them somehow.
Yeah, and so uh, one of the important elements of non-distraction is non-distraction doesn't mean that you don't have thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. It's not non-distraction and they're like, I'm only on my breath and nothing but the breath. It's that you're not losing touch with awareness.
Exactly. You're not losing touch with this sense of being.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, uh,
Which is different
but
than
and
most how we usually think of distraction. We usually think of
it
I'm reading and then I lost track of reading, or I was driving and I lost track. But this is actually a little different in a way.
Yeah, and the issue of distinguishing this from, not having thoughts is very important because I think some people confuse being non-distracted with not having thoughts. Uh, and I think you would agree that that's not at all what we mean here. And it's actually quite possible to have thoughts during this
Yeah, absolutely.
um,
Actually,
during
a
this.
key ingredient is that you can have thoughts. It's that you actually can have anything, like anything can and should be allowed. And actually, it reminds me of Kieran Fox's and Kalina Christoph's, that meta-analysis they did of they were looking at different kinds of meditation and looking across a range of different studies. And you could see that like in focused attention type practices, the default mode network does deactivate. But there's other forms of meditation where that's not the case, that actually the default mode network, which is associated with thought, can actually continue to function. So I thought that was a
Right.
kind
And
of an
in this,
elegant way of showing something similar.
exactly. And that in what we're talking about here, shifting from a mode of doing to a mode of simply being, would not necessarily be associated with a suppression of the default mode.
Yeah,
Because thoughts will still arise. And in fact, one of the things that I would suggest is that your experience of creativity actually is a function of the thoughts.
exactly. Exactly.
Uh,
And
and,
it's
and
the combination, the effortlessness and the presence together, it creates the space where creative thoughts can actually happen freely. And because you're still present, you don't lose them. You actually can you don't normally they might happen, but they're just gone because your mind is moving so fast or you're just on
right,
to
and
something else.
if you are exactly, and in the mode of doing, you are even if you're not aware of it, there are parts of your brain which are basically um, directing your thoughts in a particular way, and the thoughts. By definition, are going to be more similar to thoughts you've had in the past.
Hmm.
And in that sense, they're more conventional and less creative. If at least one element of creativity is novelty, you're much less likely to have a novel thought during a mode of doing than a mode of being because your mind is being directed. Um, and so, and the presence is super important because that allows you, as you say, to actually be aware of it. I think that the humans are actually much more creative than we give ourselves credit for, but we just don't remember
Yeah,
these episodes very much. And it's just like dreams. Everyone dreams every night, but most people don't remember their dreams.
exactly. I mean,
Um,
the traditional example for this is perfect. You have this classic image of a candle flame in a glass enclosure. And normally, what they say is that the candle flame is like the spark of insight that we might have, like a little epiphany, which could be a huge life changing epiphany, or it can just be some insight into something that's going on in your life. But normally, what happens is we have those all the time, but it's like the candle flame is outside on a windy day. So it happens, but it's just blown out the next moment. And what the presence does is it's like the glass enclosure, so it can spark. And then you've learned to sort of ground yourself in awareness to such a degree that that candle flame never goes out, and you can dial it up or down. And there's whole other research. We could talk about the gamma research as well. I mean, there's other studies just showing that these advanced meditators can actually do that. It's like you can willfully spark a moment of creativity and sustain that over time, which is precisely what happens, with very experienced meditation states.
yeah. Yeah, I agree. So one other just element to throw in the mix here, and that is um, we've talked about the role of the prefrontal cortex, and we've talked about this U-shaped function. We also talked about the fact that in this kind of mode of being compared to a mode of doing, the default mode is not necessarily suppressed,
Hmm.
and it may be the source of some of the thoughts and creative insights that may emerge during this kind of state, which may become a trait.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, but what another element here that is important to note is the relationship among networks in the brain, or in more sort of neuro lingo, the connectivity among these networks. And this is something that an increasing number of hard nosed empirical studies of meditation are beginning to demonstrate that really the sort of biggest impact on the brain in general is on connectivity among these networks.
Hmm.
Both what we would say is both functional connectivity and structural connectivity. And what we mean by that is functional connectivity is how these networks are talking to each other. And by structural connectivity, we literally mean the wiring that is physically connecting one network to another. So they're connected by these large white matter bundles, and white matter is the part of the neuron that connects one neuron to the other. Um, uh, and and it shows up on an MRI scan as primarily white matter, and we can separately image that and compute the integrity of those white matter tracks very quantitatively. And and our research, as well as the research of others, shows that uh, connectivity is really the first major kind of parameter to change in response to meditation. In fact,
Hmm.
we have some new data. I've mentioned this to you, Cort, not yet published. So you Dharma Lab folks are getting a sneak preview
It's a
of
secret. You
something.
can't tell anybody after you listen to
Yeah, hot off the press.
it.
But I mean, it's kind of amazing, but we've found that with our Healthy Minds program, the more engaged a practitioner is, and that is measured simply as the number of days in which the app was used over a period of 1 month. So within a 1 month period, you would be considered more engaged if you use the
Which is
app on
from a meditative point of view, I mean, like a tiny amount of time,
tiny,
actually.
tiny,
And just a few
tiny.
minutes a day. We're not talking like hours a day or anything.
Yeah. And so what we found is that meditators who are more engaged, who are using the app more for a greater number of days within this 1 month period, actually show um, structural changes in their brain in this connectivity. Um, and it's primarily connectivity between the central executive network and a key hub of the default
I was
mode.
just gonna say, yeah, that's amazing. I mean, in kind of real world terms, it's the capacity to kind of regulate your own mental and emotional states, and and the part of your brain that's like the thinking, ruminating mind. And so you're basically connect. I mean, that's amazing to me. That I mean, not that it happens. I think we would expect that that happens in meditation, but that it happens literally with minutes a day for a few weeks. Like
Yeah,
that to me is
yeah,
shocking. That there's actual structural changes in the brain in that period of time.
yeah. I mean, it's really quite mind blowing for me too, and it's one of the empirical findings that supports this kind of slogan that I've been using lately, which is that it's easier than you think.
Yeah.
The fact that we can actually see changes in our brain with such short amounts of practice is kind of astounding. Now, one of the things that's important to quickly point out is that nobody believes that these changes are going to endure
Yeah.
without continued practice. So it's important that everyone understands that that's not what we're saying. Um, uh, but the fact
You
that
don't
you
need to wait
see,
till we have 30,000 hours and have rented a cave in the Himalayas or something to have it. I mean, it's like the changes happen right away, basically.
right, but for them to be sustained, it's likely that we need to continue
Yeah.
to
It's like working
practice.
out. You wouldn't work out for a few weeks and say, oh, I'm done for the rest of my life. You, of course, need to keep eating healthy, keep working out. I'm curious.
Exactly.
So, I mean, this to me is a pretty compelling case for this magical alchemy between this effortless quality of mind and the presence that you can imbue that with, which is really open awareness. I mean, it is the practice of open awareness we're talking about, and it's also, I think, the clear why that would be such a source of insight and creativity, because you're kind of creating the inner circumstances within which you would both have insights and breakthroughs, and also the inner space to nurture those and to kind of stay with them versus they just get lost in the busyness of life. The part we haven't talked about yet, which maybe we could end on, is the third component. So we've talked about effortless presence. The third of these components is, I was using the word natural. In Buddhist lingo and Buddhist psychology, there's this very technical term of non-fabrication, is like the actual technical term. But what it means is you are simply allowing whatever happens in your body and mind and experience to unfold without interference. In other words, you are not aiming for any state of mind. You are not holding on to anything. You're not pushing anything away. It's just like you're just kind of opening the doors as wide as they go. Or as we often say, like you're opening the aperture of awareness as wide as it possibly will go. And to me, if I think about less from a scientific point of view, but I think about my life just as a meditator, the most healing moments in my practice actually are around this quality of naturalness, where it's like, again, you need that alchemy of the effortless presence. And then there's just like in that space, what I find, and I'd be curious to hear if this has been your experience, it's almost like there's just all the stuff that's stuck in the system, which could be memories, thoughts, emotions, feelings, stuff in the even physical stuff in the body. It's almost like you're creating the space where the the hardened plaque of experience begins to sort of soften up and eventually move, and eventually a lot of it can just sort of purify. It feels purificatory in some way, but not because you're trying to do something with it, but almost because you're not
Yeah,
interfering with it. And
yeah.
we just have
So
this
I,
world where we don't have any space for that. So this is creating
yeah,
that space. I mean, I'd be curious to
yeah,
hear what you think.
yeah. No, I love your description. It's borders on poetic, and but it's
The
very
first and only time anybody's ever accused me of being poetic, so I appreciate that.
Um, but and it also jives with my experience. And so, in my view, this idea of non-fabrication has a very important neural correlate. And what it is, one of the things that we know, and there's a huge emphasis on this in modern neuroscience, um, the brain is a prediction machine.
Mm.
We're constantly predicting what's going to happen. And the way things work is that the brain makes a prediction, input comes in, and we check the input against the prediction. That's
And we're
that
just constantly
is
trying to refine that predictive ability, basically to keep ourselves safe and alive, I would assume.
exactly, and that is the primary operating mode in this mode of doing. When we say the mode of doing, it's the business of
It
making
exactly, yeah.
predictions.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
what it is. And so
Exactly.
when we this idea of non-fabrication and naturalness is about giving up the predictions.
Mm.
It's about letting go of those predictions, or at least diminishing them. They may not disappear entirely, or that may take a while, but and we talked about this all being on a continuum, but in the extreme it's giving up the predictions.
Hmm.
And that is the kind of pure essence of being when we just stop making predictions. um
So let me ask you a question. So I think there's two angles to this. One is that a lot of the healing power is probably something to do that, because a lot of times it's almost, to put it in those terms, say we have some difficult experience from our childhood, or it could be earlier in the day, it could be from any time period, but it's sort of gets stuck in the system, so to speak. Later that day, or a year later, or 10 years later, or 50 years later, we're actually still thinking about it. And it's almost like the brain is caught in a predictive loop. It's like trying to do that thing, but it somehow got stuck. And we're
mhm.
no longer in the context where we need to even be thinking about that or worrying about that, but it's our whole system got stuck in that somehow. So to me, what it feels like it's happening is it's somehow breaking it. Like you would never want the predictive quality of experience to stop, right? Like you wouldn't want to take that offline, because obviously to navigate the world, we need to do that. Forget about surviving, even just to go out the door and go places. But what it seems like it does in the healing is to release the places where that got stuck in a loop that's no longer adaptive or healthy. And what it creates space for is it is to have all of that resources freed up. So rather than it's stuck to contexts that are long outdated, you can be completely responsive and probably much more accurate in the way it's playing in the moment. And that's why I think we see, and you talk about His Holiness the Dalai Lama all the time, Mingyur Rinpoche, these great meditation masters, they're very kind of spontaneous. There's a spontaneity that you see with great meditation teachers,
Spontaneity and
and
flexibility.
flexibility. And it's not like they're tuned out. Like it's almost like the predictive mechanism is like operating perfectly, but it's probably because they're not carrying the baggage of like 1,000 predictions that got stuck. I don't know if I'm breaking the predictive analogy here. I might be taking this too far, but there's something to that, like of like there's this spontaneous engagement with what's going on in the moment that that feels like it's like somehow we've found a way to optimize that system by releasing the stuff that doesn't need to be present anymore. I don't know if I'm getting a little
Yeah.
too mystical here, but let me know what you think.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that there may be some elements of that. There's really, as we began this episode, we mentioned that there's virtually no actual research on this. I mean, there are tidbits here and there that we've drawn upon to help flesh this out, but it has not been studied explicitly. So. Um, I'm not sure what more we really could say about it.
And maybe to round this out, we could talk a little bit about the practical side of this, just since some of this probably feels pretty abstract for people who haven't been doing this. I'd be curious what you would say and what you found helpful in your life. I think for me, the first thing I would say is really around daily rituals and the importance of having time to really unplug, even sometimes from a meditative point of view, like the meditative doing side of things, which is to say, like sometimes, like actually, I remember when I was getting my PhD and was working at the center, and that was just a super busy period of time, really demanding. I had a lot going on in my life, even outside of the PhD. And I remember one thing I would do is I would go into this quiet, one of like the psychophys rooms where usually it wasn't being used during the day. And I would just go and I would just lie on my back and just lie down on the ground just for like 10 minutes at a time in the middle of the day. And it was this sort of effortless presence and just sometimes just gently tuning into my body, but in a very light, effortless way. So things like that. And I still do that a lot, like just having little moments, whether it's 30 seconds or a few minutes, ideally longer periods where you can just really unplug and let be. So that's one thing I would say for me
Yeah.
that's been helpful. I don't know What do
Yeah,
you
I mean, for me, I find that there are every single day there are periods during which I will um, very intentionally drop into a mode of being during these kind of interstitial
Mhm.
spaces. You know, it might be waiting in a line. Um, it might be waiting for a meeting to start. You know, and just simply resting, being there, eyes wide open, just allowing the natural scene to unfold without, you know, again, the prediction machine is not, you know, is not active, is turned off. Um, and You know, I love this metaphor that is used in our tradition, our practice tradition, of in this kind of mode, the mind is self-illuminating. So
Mm.
if you light a candle in a dark room, you don't need a flashlight to see the candle. The candle is self-illuminating. And when we're in a mode of being, the mind is self-illuminating. And there's something that is intrinsically pleasant and deeply relaxing about restorative about being in this kind of state. And it's so accessible. You know, once you have tasted it, you know, a few times, it's easier to recognize that it's actually always with you. You
Yeah,
just
because it
have
takes
to
no
notice
effort
it.
and it's always there. It's yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's the beauty of it. Yeah, actually, I mean, what you're saying so resonates with me and very much mirrors kind of, I would say, what I found helpful as well. In addition, I mean, I think it's incredibly helpful to have periods of dedicated practice and doing practices like open awareness or choiceless awareness. There's, you know, for people who haven't done these, you can look these up. Maybe we can put a link to a guided meditation here. But in any case, that's helpful. But as you're saying, these little gaps, as you put it, the interstitial moments, there's really important reasons why those are so potent, and it relates to a principle in the Tibetan tradition that is called Bardo, which some people might have heard that term. Literally, it just means a gap, and it's a gap between conditioned habitual behaviors or contexts. And that's why those gaps that you're talking about are so helpful, because if you think about, say you have like a moment between a meeting, like you finished one thing, say you were doing some work at your desk and you've got a meeting in a minute that you've got to go to, but you have 30 seconds. Well, what's happening there is you had like a script, like almost a script you were running for the prior activity. You were answering emails or whatever you were doing. And there's a script for the next activity. But in that moment, you don't have a script. Right? And so it's a great moment for
Exactly.
the effortless. Like it's harder, it's not impossible, but it's harder when you have like an active, like this is what my mind should be doing. This is what my body should be doing in this given context. It's harder to tap into these natural qualities that you just mentioned. But in that gap where you don't have a script, it's like a little gap in the programming, you know, to use for those who watch the
Yeah.
Matrix movies. It's like there's a glitch in the Matrix,
Mm.
something like that, right? This is like a little window. And actually, those moments are happening all the time because we're switching between contexts all the time. So when you start noticing that, there's just like a million opportunities every day just to drop into that. And then even if it's a few seconds or a minute, then you can just carry that quality of being into whatever you're doing next. The key, just to add one thing to what you said that I think is so critical here, is that unlike times past, we now fill that space. We have an impulse to fill that space by picking up our phone, by listening to something, and we're just used to filling that space. And so that's maybe one of the practices too, is don't fill the space. Like just like don't pick up your phone. Like notice that urge and just go, like see if you can just rest in that space for a few moments. And I think
Yeah.
that's a great little trick that if you can do that, you'll find 100 opportunities every day where it's a little, as we say, a micro dose of being to sprinkle throughout your day.
Yeah. That's great.
Well, uh, this was a great, I'm glad we did this in such an unscripted way. It's a little longer than we typically talk. So clearly we got excited about this. Hopefully, if you're still listening to this, you found something helpful here. So thank you, Richie. That was a lot of fun. And for everybody listening, thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you again on another episode of Dharma Lab.
Thank you. Great to be here.